Hi, do you want to know how to do translations and transformations in math? Well, this is the video for you. To start, these are the 3 types of transformations I'm going to teach you. Let's tackle these one at a time. The most basic ones are going to be translations. A translation moves the graph from point A to point B with no changes in shape or size. Translations are generally paired with the variables h and k, h being the horizontal translation and k being the vertical translation. Now, what about these two, a and b? A and b represent stretches that are done to the graph. A being a vertical stretch and B being the horizontal stretch. To do these stretches, you times the x or y value by the variable that is being used. For example, say your a value is 2. This will stretch the graph by a factor of 2. Conversely, if your a value was 1/2, it would stretch it by a factor of 1/2. For b values, it's the same thing. Now, if your b value equals 1/2 in the equation itself, you would think that you times the x values by a factor of 1/2, right? No. You actually times it by the reciprocal of itself. So in this case, you'd actually times it by 2. Same thing goes the other way. So imagine the b value inside of your equation was actually 2. You would times the x value by 1/2. Why, you may ask? I don't know. I don't get it. And finally, reflections, which are fairly simple. If your a value is negative, reflect that across the x-axis. If your b value is negative, reflect that across your y-axis. Let's do some questions now that we know what these values mean. Y equals x plus 5 squared minus 2. Let's compare this to the original equation. A equals 0, b equals 0, h equals negative 5, and k equals negative 2. But wait, you might say, but Kian, that's a positive 5. Are you dumb? Well, yes, I am. H is always the opposite of whatever sign is in there. In this case, x plus 5. To get it out of there, you do simple math and you get negative 5. Anyways, with the values you've collected, move the graph accordingly. Go 5 units to the left and 2 units down. And boom, question done. Now let's look at this one. This might look scary, but it's not. Let's start with finding all the values. A equals negative 3, b equals 2 over 3, h equals 4, and k equals 2. Now when dealing with transformations and translations, you must always do the transformations first. This also includes reflections. So let's start off with A equals negative 3. Note that it is a negative, so we reflect it across the x-axis and times the y value by 3. Next, b equals 2 over 3. So for this question, instead of it being 2 over 3, it's actually 3 over 2. So times all the x values by 3 over 2. Next, we'll do the h and k values. Looking at the equation, we can see that h equals 4 and k equals 2. So move the whole graph 4 units to the right and 2 units up. And question done. One other type of question you might get will be based on trying to determine an equation from a graph. Here's how. Look at this graph. We need to write this graph's equation in terms of this graph's equation. Start by measuring the horizontal distance between these points. Now we can notice that this one's 4 and this one's 2. This means that it was a factor of 1/2. And we notice the reflection across the y-axis, meaning b equals negative 1 over 2. Now we look for the vertical one. This one's length is 2, and this one's length is 1, meaning that our a value is equal to 1/2. But don't forget to look for any reflections, which in this case, there is. Now, once you've done these, make sure you draw them on the graph. Here's the one in terms of b, and here's the one in terms of both b and a. Alright, now that we're done looking for our transformations and reflections, which we always do first, we look for our h and k values, aka our translations. Pick a point in the graph that matches up with the newer graph and see how many units it takes to get over there. With this one, we see it takes 3.5 units, meaning our h equals negative 3.5. Next, we see how many units it takes to go up or down. In this case, we have to go up until it matches. It moves up 1.5 units, so our k equals 1.5. Now we have all of our values needed to find the equation. A equals negative 1 over 2, b equals negative 1 over 2, but don't forget to always take the reciprocal of it when it's placed in the equation, so this actually becomes a negative 2. And the next is our h, which is equal to negative 3.5. Don't forget to make the equation the opposite sign. And to top it all off, our k equals 1.5, meaning we write down 1.5 to end it. And that's basically all the main stuff you'll need to know in terms of how to interpret transformations. However, there are a few miscellaneous things I can mention. Inverse relations are fairly simple. Just swap the x and y values of ordered pairs. The domain and range also swap and become the range and domain. Another thing is ordered notation. It's essentially a mathematical way of stating the transformations. We'll use the equation from earlier. Start by writing your x and y. This is your initial function. Then write an arrow indicating the transformed one. What happened to the x? It was stretched by a factor 3 over 2 and had been translated 4 units to the right. So, 3 over 2 times x plus 4 is what our x equals. Our y was times by a factor of negative 3 and moved 2 units up, so negative 3 times y plus 2. Meaning our final notation is xy turns into 3 over 2 times x plus 4 and negative 3 times y plus 2. And done.